paper, and then really it's over to a discussion and to really hear from everyone around the table what's concerning this table about this particular direction, and we can work through those issues together and also take them on board. So the first thing, so the first thing about why do we extract gravel, it is purely in our flood control schemes to maintain the level of protection that those flood control schemes are providing our community. And under the various acts and legislation, the Regional Council doesn't make any profit or any revenue from that activity. In fact, if we collect more rates than we spend managing the resource, we need to return those rates to the people we took them from. So at the moment we do charge 80 cents per cubic metre, which basically covers the cost of us managing the resource, and there's a lot behind the scenes around surveying, calculating and monitoring the various consents. So this consent is about moving from an old system where the consenting authority part of the Regional Council has effectively novated or permitted the asset management group to issue 12-month consents to industry. And so this, which was good in its day, but we need to move on from that particular methodology. And this consent is where the asset management group holds a consent and is then responsible to the consenting authority for the performance of that consent. And that does two things. It gives industry greater certainty because they're currently working on a 12-month cycle, and it also gives us greater control in how that operation is undertaken. And when I look at the journey that we've taken on this consent, I consider that it's almost a failure in that after 5 years, with no one actually objecting to the consent, that we've been unable to resolve some of the finer details. And in fact, the new regime is far superior to the old regime, and we're unable to implement that new regime. So it's been a very long road. There's been a high level of agreement on major themes, but just unable to get that final agreement. And in fact, we're now going to a hearing to sort of battle it out in more of an adversarial manner. So that's what I'm keen to talk to about today. I've probably covered more than I thought I would. Martina, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think just to know that the new consent really will give us and give everyone better management of the gravel, which will include more control on environmental aspects, the cultural aspects. So it does give us an opportunity to kind of plan the gravel management in a better way. And it will also perhaps give certainty to extractors for a longer term extraction. So we will be able to perhaps allocate the gravel not particularly on the locations of the river. So and I think that's a significant change in the way we will be managing the gravel source in the river. And also, we will be the consent holders, so we will be responsible to make sure that the conditions in the consents are managed properly. And I think that is a significant change.
So in relation, I suppose 10 years ago we talked to Gary Cloak when obviously he was managing this process, and obviously we done the Tutaikiri our management plan and put in steps in that around, and obviously at that point in time gravel extraction was a kōrero. I don't know, Waiahiki, they used to have an extraction plant. We used to come over the bridge here and all that and extract gravel. I suppose the economic situation, and when you look at that pricing, you said it's uneconomical, but with the demand on gravel for these new building projects that are happening, and that I suppose you would have done some forecasting around it, because I thought I heard that there was limited supply for the amount of gravel that was required. So if we look at that model with supply and demand, then obviously that would push the price up. I don't know, I haven't looked at it, but I'm just saying, because then it brings us back to the conversation we've had with Gary 10 years ago. We said as mana whenua, what value does mana whenua get in relation to getting some return? And we talk about watercress patches down the river that our whānau used to go to. So when we're looking at that funding, and I know you said you didn't get any modelling, but how do we build capacity to meet our whānau needs that access the awa to, say, pick watercress and have backwashes where the inanga can go into and the tuna can go and sit. So is there potential for that, around that extraction, for a percentage to be included in that for environmental Māori projects to sustain up the river? And I haven't looked, you know, we talk about the economics, you said 80 cents, but is that a real figure? Because if they're wanting to increase the demand on shingle, that means there's demand for it. You know what I'm saying? So can we, and for tangata whenua, I'd have to ask that question, because obviously that may provide an income stream to do some of that mahi.
Yeah, so on that, a couple of things in there. So the first one is around environmental enhancement. So that's something we do want to talk to mana whenua about, and we've got a draft kaitiaki liaison agreement to help understand what's important to marae and hapu along the rivers. So that's something we want to work on, and we can legitimately fund some enhancement through the activity to effectively restore the awa in a better condition than before the extraction took place. In terms of extraction, we only undertake it in river control schemes. So there is two exceptions, one being the Esk River and one being the Mohaka River, where gravel extraction occurs on a lot smaller scale, but there's no need for it for flood control. So it's purely resource availability to the community. That 80 cents that I spoke about, we've done a lot of work to look at what our costs are in managing the resource, and it is independent of the market rate. Because of the legislation and framework that we operate under as a regional council, we are divorced from the market rate. We can only charge the costs that we incur as a council in managing that resource. And through the LTP, we recently put that up to $1.20 per cubic metre, because we ran a 10-year scenario of the costs involved in managing the resource and all the activities we do. So there is a fact base behind that particular number. But we cannot link it to the market without the central government changing the laws around how this particular resource is
But you
managed.
could link it to the market if it complies with mana whenua, like whether it's our Māori Standing Committee or whoever makes that recommendation that river enhancement or that part of the project includes working on those projects within that river, because you rake it, don't you? You go through and if that was built into the costing mechanism or formula, then obviously we can provide for some of that enhancement in our awa, which we all want, the community want, we want, Māori want, and then it provides for our whānau when they go down to pick watercress, because they go down and all they see is duckweed. They say, hey, what was that duckweed? We can't pick no watercress. So with your planning, when you're going through implementing the extraction, you can build that, and maybe a backwash where the tuna can go, the inanga can go up and sit in there and rest. Because when we go down the river, and I go from my childhood experience, when I used to go down Ealing, we used to catch, there was a lot of inanga, but now you don't see it. So I'm just saying, if you built that into the modelling and costed it back into what you're saying, $1.20 if that's the market rate.
No. I just want to clarify, the market for aggregate products which are processed and hauled around the place by the extraction industry, they've put a lot of work into that product, so very little of it is run a river, so that there is work and value added. The rate that we determine is the cost of managing the resource, which can incorporate a level of enhancement, but it would be inappropriate to put the total enhancement of all the issues with the awa into this particular regime. So, for example, one of the areas that we haven't been able to agree, particularly with Nikki, is around wanting the gravel extraction consent and the agreement with the Kaitiaki liaison to specifically look at river recharge or recharge to the Helatonga aquifer. So that's far beyond the scope of what this activity is delivering. Everyone, I think, wants to enhance and improve the river, but the question is this the appropriate mechanism? And we cannot justify fixing water, all the water quality issues with the river through a charge on extraction, because we have to link it directly to the cost of managing the resource. So there's a window for some enhancement, but not enhancing every aspect. And that's what our plans, our consenting framework, and all of what the Regional Council does contributes to those improvements.
Ellie?
Yeah, just, Chris, just go back to that, like the last meeting I asked about the Pyro flood scheme.
Yep.
I see you got some flood money here that you got into a lot of the other schemes. Why doesn't the Pyro need any assistance?
So the Pyro scheme is a drainage scheme, and my understanding it currently doesn't have issues with grading gravel in the scheme. So effectively what a scheme has done is
neither does erosion on the riverbank of the Wairau River. There's no gravel there either, but you've got $1 million for that.
So that's a different issue. So the paper we're looking at the moment is we took it out of order. I apologise. We brought this paper forward. The paper that was next in line is the IRG projects, and so we do have $1 million that we're funding erosion control on the Whenua River, but that's through erosion, and it's a different subject to the next paper. So,
But it's in there.
well, we're looking at item 13,
It's in 12?
and
12?
you're referring to item 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll bring that
So
up
we'll
on 12.
come back to item 12 later. Yep.
Well-
I've just changed the order on you.
I
So-
just-
sorry.
Yeah, oh, well, it's another question then,
Yep.
it's the one that Peter's talking about. The 80 cents, I guess, is what we're talking about. So, of course, the Mohawk is only so small, it doesn't actually generate that much. So you've allocated that funding for a river monitor?
So we have so on the Mohaka there's a specific arrangement with Ngāti Parawera where we have an agreement around co-management of that resource, which was part of their settlement.
Yep.
And so we have both the Regional Council and a nominated person from Ngāti Parawera manage that resource. And you're right, it is relatively small. There's about 60,000 cubic metres per year taken from that particular river. And in comparison, if we look at the historic levels on the Narororo, they're probably between 600,000 and 700,000. So there's a real difference in the volumes between those particular.
But that's used for flood management control.
Yeah, so we only do it on rivers where we have apart from those two examples, where we have a flood control scheme, and that is we have constrained the river by building stop banks.
Yeah.
So there's a fairway that's 100, 200, 300 metres wide, and we have to maintain a cross-sectional area, a minimum cross-sectional area, so that the design flood can pass effectively through that channel. And we will forever and a day have material coming down from the mountains, making its way to the coast, and that aggregates grades in the river, and that's the reason it's one of our management practices to remove that material out. So if it doesn't need to be removed, we don't consent it. So we are constantly measuring the rivers in a whole host of locations to determine what that cross-section should be, and we only allow the extractive industry to go to the minimum level that we need the level to be at. And then we say, well, you need to go to a different area. And so that's the main driver, is to provide that level of service to the community.
Cool. So, but all the dikes are up and in place, so.
Yep.
Was
Yep,
that
and if
paid
we-
for by just gravel extraction?
Yeah, so it's a key part of the management practice of those schemes. It's not an activity in itself.
Okay.
Anything?
Yeah, my main point, and I suppose for us to Not, I want to be a stickler, but I just think if a percentage allocated out of that fund through the regional council to meet some objectives in regards to returning, because you're taking a resource out and then what's getting put back in. So you should always replenish, and so if it's going out there, and what's being done to replenish the management. So that's, I suppose from a mana whenua perspective, we'd like to see something returned to the awa, because you're taking it out. Yep. So let's put something back into the awa to make it better for the future.
It's reciprocation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Reciprocation.
So that would have to be built into the framework, I suppose. It would help me support it, because I'll be thinking, oh yeah, that's good, they're putting something back, it's not just take. Yeah. So if that can be put into the model, then I'd be more supportive. I'm just giving my point of view.
Part of our value. Mike, sorry I didn't see you in.
Kia ora. So yeah, I'll just carry on from that. I suppose what I see there is basically the same as government's attitude to water, and nobody owns water. We're basically getting the same conversation here, nobody owns gravel. That's basically where this thing is sitting.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
That's what I hear.
Yeah. And so that's where this conversation sits. So it's really a conversation for down Wellington again around the ability to actually, if you like, be able to charge over and above what it costs to the council to monitor and put in place the program. Going back, Chris, and thank you for the paper, much appreciated. I do take on your board in regards to the conversations that up to this point, there really hasn't been any pushback in regards to what is being proposed. And I don't think that is the issue. I think what is the real issue is the action that's taking place on the ground. So it'd be fair to say what our Central Hawke's Bay whānau is currently seeing take place on their riverbeds is something they have not seen before, at the level that they have not seen before. And that is what's causing the concern. Because nowhere along this journey of conversation, of engagement, have they actually been told this is what you can expect going forward. We do appreciate that we have had PGF funding, which has kind of allowed the ability of regional council to, if you like, increase its footprint and operational within the space, and hence we've seen a increase in that activity. But what we have seen from that is encroachment by the contractors, who have gone down a little bit deeper than what perhaps they should have gone, and have broken the surface, which straight away gives concerns from the whānau see extraordinary activity take place. They see damage done, automatically alarm bells ring. The other place, and we've seen that in regards to, so we've seen this presentation from Māori several times now, in regards to the mountains that have been built around shingle, gravel extraction. Also the potential undermining of wahi tapu, and not seeing that being addressed. That gives concern. And so you spoke of the ability to monitor. So our understanding that there was a agreement that there would be the opportunity for mana whenua alongside regional council to monitor. And they kind of wondering, so where has that got to? Where has that gone? And if it's not happening, why isn't it happening? So from TTOH's perspective, we feel the only card we have left to play at this point in time is the actual hearings card, because the conversations from our point of view are just not happening, which actually gives us confidence going forward. We will also note that as part of the overall consenting process was that there was to be a 5-year review as part of that consenting process. So it just happened to be a 5-year review. And I suppose to a certain degree, our 5-year review of this is, hey, we need to go to consents, because what we're seeing is not what we believe was supposed to happen. So that's just a bit of a bit of background as to where we are and the concerns that are coming forward from TTOH. So it's how do we navigate that so we don't get in this hearing space, because we all know that is it's not always the most productive space to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Space of last resort.
Chair,
Look at these.
Can I just make a comment in relation to this, because I think the situation we've found ourselves in is kind of symptomatic of, and acknowledge you, Mike, in terms of, not where we want to be.
Yep.
And I'll put it as bluntly as this: the fact that the Hiritonga Taiwhenua feel that their only course of action is to, go to hearings, is the same sort of sentiment that I think has led us down the path of not establishing the Kaitiaki reference group and getting co-monitoring and getting co-management of the resource progressed, because we too want to get the resource consent lodged, so we've got some security around our operating arrangement before we move to this new approach, which is to say we all agree that the resource has been managed inadequately historically. We all agree there's been environmental impact that is unacceptable, and we all agree that we need to manage the resource collectively. And the new resource consent framework was to enable us to get control of what the extractors are doing, and then in partnership with the Kaitiaki reference group to then monitor and make management decisions around the resource. So I think we all wanted to achieve the same thing, but because of the lack of trust and confidence in the regional council through looking back on the past, and that's been a continuing theme through things like the tank plan change, understandably, the Taiwhenua is looking at us and saying, well, we're not really sure about your commitment to this, so we're going to take 2 years of trying to set up meetings, trying to talk, which has been enormously frustrating, I think, for everybody, to even get to sign off on consent. We're now going to hearings. And so rather than actually us getting on with the new operating approach, we've both been sort of standing back and now using a legal process to try and reconcile that. And so lawyers are going to win out of that. So, look, I'd like to think that we can get around the table, we can get Ngāo, Māori around a table, and we can be talking about actually operationalising this framework ahead of and regardless of the consent. But we get the consent secured, so the regional council's in a position where it's actually in control of this resource, rather than the arrangements we've had historically. So I'm being a bit blunt about it, because I'm as frustrated as you are that we've spent 2 years talking when we've got issues that you can see happening in the hour that we need to be managing right now. So hopefully, following this conversation, I was hoping that Mare was going to be here today, so I could have said that directly to him. Hopefully we can shift this to a different space quickly, because the hour's needed.
So so I think we would be happy to explore that. The hearing process is still sitting out there, and at the end of the day, it's sitting out there. But here's an opportunity for us to get ahead of that and see where this space takes us.
And I'd also like just to let everyone know that if they are observing activities in the rivers that they're not happy with, to give us a call straight away. We do have staff patrolling the rivers looking at this activity, but of course they can't be everywhere all at the same time. And by calling it in with some details, it helps us have those discussions. And I can say we have written letters to a number of operators in the last month outlining our concerns and the impact it may have on any future consents that they hold. So our expectation is that those consent holders in the extractive industry are doing everything that's required from them. And we're out there, and we've recently categorised them all as high, medium or low risk. And the high risk extractors will be basically getting a weekly visit to their operation to ensure we're over those issues that you're raising.
Can I just ask a question? I've been really interested in following Mike's comments and James's. And I thought at the beginning they were starting quite a bit apart, but then I thought we're heading together. So I just like someone to summarise for me where we think this meeting's got to. Because I just think there's been a sharing of views, and I think we're heading to a place. I just like someone to sort of summarise where we think we've got to, so we can all hear that, and then we acknowledge what it is. But so, James, where do you think we've got to?
Can I throw a spoke in the wheel here? I'm just looking at all these pictures. The first time I ever seen them. This is not minor damage. You just can't write this off as being, it's okay. This looks like there's no supervision of this at all. That's major damage. Who's responsible, like you talked about being the consenter, are you responsible for that? Look at that.
So under the current model, the extractor receives a 12-month consent from the asset management group. The asset management group monitor the performance of those extractors. Where we believe they haven't been doing the work the way they should have, we involve the compliance team to issue letters, etc., to those consent holders. So some of what is in there, I wouldn't agree is alarming. What can happen with some of the extraction, particularly when it appears underwater, if we get rain or the river level shifts and you go to the extraction site a few weeks after the extraction has taken place, it can look like there's puddles in the extracted area. So we really need that information at the time to make the correct information. And when we're aware of serious issues, we take that up with the consent holder. And that's why I say taking photographs, sitting on them for a month and not actually sending that information in a timely manner makes it harder for us to undertake compliance activity, because we can't see it when it's happening, and then once a few months have gone by, it's a lot more challenging.
Like I look at this picture here, and the level of the gravel is almost 1.5 meters higher than where we've dug it out, and then they've gone underground here. And that's not just a little area. That's days and days of taking out of there. You know, is there no monitoring of the operator down there?
So, Potter, precisely where we want to get to is we want to spread the impact as broadly across the schemes as possible, so that we don't get over extraction in certain places. But on the other side of this conversation right now, we've got the construction and the aggregate community lobbying district councils, cabinet ministers, etc., saying the regional economy is going to fall apart because all of the construction projects that are happening across the whole region haven't got the gravel and won't have the gravel that they need, because we're asking them to spread their load and it's going to cost them more. And so their profit margins are going to be diminished. So we're kind of the meat and the sandwich here a little bit, between pressures on the one side to preserve the natural character of our river environments. We've got the flood management objective where we've got to get gravel out, but we'd like to see that smoothed over time and taken in a way that has the lowest environmental impact. But then that comes at an economic cost of the extractors, and to avoid the ratepayer having to fund all of that extraction and create great gravel mounds, we need the gravel to be used in construction, roading, etc., and we need that to be largely paid for by the private sector. So we're kind of balancing all of this, and where I think, to answer Rick's question, we need to get to is around the table in an operational management committee context. So we're working through these in real time rather than periodic conversations at this table or through the Environment Court or through hearings processes where we're just arguing when actually we agree. We've all got the same objectives, but at the moment there's not a co-management framework. So that's where I think we have to get to quickly.
So just pick up on that point. So pick up that, I just wanted to ask Michael and the rest of the team, do they think a co-management framework as suggested there would work and deal with issues on a...
Is that the answer?
Sorry?
Is that the answer?
Is that the answer to this? Otherwise we wind up, it's sort of a litigious court thing and hearing things, or do we want to have something, we've got a functioning committee, co-governance committee, where we can meet regularly and talk to the extractors, talk to the council, talk to Māori Whenua and say, right, what are we doing here? Because I think you're getting on the nail here, because we've got to manage it closer to the time and by discussion rather than by litigation. So have we got a framework of an idea here that we could then proceed with, and maybe come back to the next committee meeting with a paper set out how that would work?
Yeah, so at the moment, the time frame is that there's a hearing, penciled in, so there's the time frame. So we've got to have this conversation before we get there,
Yeah.
or we'll have it there, but we'll end up having the conversation. I think the real thing here is that we get a good understanding of where everybody is. And so I would say on behalf of Taiwhenua Heretaunga, our understanding around the monitoring requirements around the code monitoring are slightly different to those of Hawke's Bay Regional Council. That's just a misunderstanding around what has been agreed to. I think getting us around the table will help clarify all that. I think it's understanding what is actually a acceptable process, the practices, is really where we're trying to get to.
I think that's exactly doable.
Yeah, something that actually balances out the environmental needs, plus the needs of the in regards to gravel extraction for a number of reasons, not just for the roads but for flood protection, is equally as important.
So
Just on that, can I just make one caveat that I'd put on what I think we're getting to by way of a solution, and that is the fact that Chris and his team are under daily pressure to ensure that there is a flow of material to support the roading and constructing sector, and there is tens of millions of dollars of processing capital investment being made in the region to process that material. And what we need to be able to do is to be able to make decisions reasonably quickly in this management framework. And I think because the fact that people have been very busy and it's taken like months and months and months to get a single meeting to have a discussion, there's a concern about really if we go into a co-management framework, is the whole thing going to grind to a halt because we can't make decisions? So if we're going to come together, it needs to be on the basis that we have to make pragmatic calls, balancing flood, environment, the construction sector, and we need to make decisions reasonably quickly. But I think if we're all on the same page about the objectives and we can resource remediation through the levy, then I think we can make this work. But I think Mare and Naia are so busy with so much of their lives that their ability to be involved in real-time decision-making on this, I think, is a problem. So we need to work out how do we resource that kaitiaki responsibility.
Correct, yeah, I was going to raise that point, the actual resourcing. So for Regional Council, it's part of their work plan. For Tangata Whenua, it's actually, at this stage, is finding the volunteers to step forward. If we can change that around so that they're actually resourced and it actually becomes, if you like, a commitment.
But therein lies the answer, Mike, is that the extractors pay for the gravel.
Correct.
The cost of which is to resource the thing.
Correct.
So therefore, if we need to resource it, it gets put into the bill.
Correct.
We get that. So I think James is on the track here.
Yep.
Get something. I think everybody agrees it needs to be pragmatic. And if we can get the resources, get the person on there, that's your job. We pay them. Bingo, we're there. They know who to talk to.
So for me, it's so the hearing time frame, the hearing's out there,
Yep.
is an opportunity for a pre-hearing conversation.
Exactly. I think that's great.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think, is part of this is that for the extractors, they need to appreciate that they have to have a social license to operate. That they can't just go there and do what they wish to in there. That we all have an interest in this, and they need to see that and feel that. Now, it's very hard for the council officers to carry that message themselves, what they do, but they see them just as council officers. Well, you're just bureaucrats. But if we have a combined group, which is the community says, well, no, you can take this gravel on these conditions because this is the community speaking to you, and this is what the rules are. I think you'll get a complete change of behaviour from the extractors, because extractors are just that. They go dig stuff up and cart it away. That's what they do. Very good at it, and I'm not worried about much else. But I just think if you have that committee meeting, get resources, put it together, I think it would work really well. The last thing I'll say to you is that what you haven't put in this is there's been a real interesting change in construction. Just look at all the construction sites around here now. They dig them out to a very large degree, and all the buildings are put on a float of gravel. We haven't had this volume of gravel required before because no one's ever done it. It's an earthquake proofing thing. It's sort of come about in the last few years. So the demand for gravel has gone up substantially, and it's critical to modern day construction. So there's a plan. I think you've got an answer there, James. You've got yourself your answer.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think if we can get that high level of trust with the contractors, because that's obviously where it's going to break down if anywhere.
And they pay,
something wrong.
and they pay as part of the consent for this resource.
The other one is that the contractors at home, obviously, they also pay funding if they go across private land. Is this not the case here? There's no private
So
land
that,
involved.
look, that does happen. We try very hard to have public accesses to where the gravel is. That's something we're building into our forward program. And so the regional council owns those roads, so they don't belong to, or there's not inferred to be any level of ownership. But there are some areas where private landowners do demand a royalty payment or a transport payment, but that's something that we want to try and work around because it is just adding costs for really benefiting a small number of landholders. So it does happen, but we don't support it.
Rent-seeking behaviour.
Perhaps you pay for it.
So, thank you. Any further conversation? I think we've given it a very good.
I agree with
action.
Rick. See, I think you can come to solution.
Yep.
It just seems like you can get there if you take those steps. I think good
But are you
recommendations.
satisfied of my giving your support to go on with that meeting?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, there's always, the hearing's always sitting out there. We'll still end up having that conversation anyway.
Kate Pai.
Yeah. We'll either have it voluntarily or we'll be told to. So either or.
And the other thing I'd say to you about this, James, is that it might have an informal committee, might lack authority, but an informal committee can assert authority. Just tell them we are authorised because we're here. So just assert authority. So this is the deal. I think you've got it on the nail, man.
Can I have a move and a signature to receive the report, please?
Yeah, I'll
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Polder. 2 Ps, kia ora, 2 Ps in the pod. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. It's carried. Going back to item 12 now, are we?
Yep, back to item 12, or it might
sorry,
be
leave
the coastal paper.
This one too. So.
Item 11. Did we get back to the original? Melanie? Yep, item 11.
Goodbye.
What page is it? Oh, there it is.
Okay, so, item 11 is page
Thank you,
53.
Martina.
So I just want to bring forward Rebecca and Melanie. All good, thank you. And Simon Bendel, another guest appearance. He's actually our project manager for our coastal hazards strategy. And he's been involved in the strategy since its inception, so he can help with any background information. So for this, Simon was going to give a brief description of where the project is in its life. We've spent the last 3 years doing a lot of technical work, and so we're entering back into an engagement with all parts of the community. And this paper is about engagement, our Māori engagement plan. And so Rebecca and Melanie will take us through that plan, and then happy to answer any questions.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Simon Bendel, tōku Whenua. Didn't say much last item, but I'll talk a bit on this one. So as Chris mentions, I'm the independent project manager for this work and have been for, I think, 5 or 6 years now. So I'm engaged jointly by the 3 partner councils involved in this, and it's Hawke's Bay Regional, Napier City and Hastings District Council. So we'll run through a brief strategy overview. I've got about 10 slides to run through to give a bit of a flavour of what this work's all about. And then Mel and Rebecca will speak to a proposed approach for engaging with mana whenua over the next 4 to 5 months, ahead of a more formalised public consultation process planned at this stage for early next year. Happy to take questions as I go, so please interrupt me if you have any questions as we go. So you may be aware of this, but the project's governed by a joint committee. It's formally established under the Local Government Act with members from the Maunga Hareru Tangitu Trust, Hiratonga Tamatia Settlement Trust, Mana Ahuriri, and the 3 partner councils. Our reps so far, we've got Tanya Hopnams there for MTT, Peter Paku for the Settlement Trust. We have a vacancy for Mana Ahuriri, so that's to be filled hopefully shortly. And 3 councillors from each of those councils form that committee. Been running since, I think the first meeting was late 2014, so it's a reasonably long established committee. The work is looking at coastal hazards and climate change over the next 100 years, and we are following central government guidance on how to plan for this. It's a very long planning horizon, some quite complex issues. This guidance came out from MFE in late 2017, so following that guidance, and it sets out a 10-step process to come up with these long-term plans, working closely with communities and how to respond to these changing effects out there. That arrow denotes where we're up to, so we're up to about step 8 in a 10-step process. So we are getting there, but it has taken quite some time to get to this point. And this is a brief summary of the steps so far. So late 2014, this joint committee was established, and we confirmed what we're going to do and what we're going to look at. We did in 2015 some quite detailed hazard assessments looking at coastal erosion and coastal inundation. And for the next 3 years, we really worked closely with our communities on coming up with these long-term plans. I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. And since late 2018, we've been in the implementation phase, so really coming up with a plan on how to actually implement these long-term pathways, actually build things on the coast and get going. Our vision is that coastal communities, businesses and infrastructure from Tangoe to Clifton are resilient to the effects of coastal hazards. So we are focused on just that bit of coastline for now. The concept is to work out, I guess, the model for how to deal with these things and roll that out region-wide in time. In scope is coastal erosion and coastal inundation only, so just the erosion from the sea and flooding from the sea. We are looking out over the next 100 years. We're not considering tsunami, that's more of a civil defence type response. We're not considering freshwater flooding, that's another package. It's just looking at those coastal effects. I guess a brief summary, you all know most of this stuff really, but just to highlight, it's a busy coastline. There's lots of issues out there. A lot of it at the moment is erosion related, so the top there is some, right now, some erosion at Whirinaki, which needs to be responded to. West Shore is actively renourished with gravel being brought in, I think, every year to offset erosion losses. That's an ongoing cost and a real activity for the councils. There's a new seawall proposed at Whakariri Ave by the Napier City Council. You might have heard about the Cape View Corner revetment being proposed, I think now consented and being built, I think right now.
I've commenced, yeah.
I've commenced, thank you. We would have all heard about the Haimoana 18, formerly 21. They're obviously right out in the sea and get hammered every time there's a big event. And the Clifton revetment at the bottom there was built a couple of years ago, I think now. So you know, there's a busy coast with a lot going on looking at these coastal hazards issues.
So when you look at, just a quick question, when you look at those coastal issues, and then obviously they're hard to control Mother Nature, no, because you can do what you can, but the national, when you look at all those predictions about sea rise and mounting glaciers and all that, we're going to see that's going to affect. And then you look at the building development there at Tongoia on the coast, and if you're modelling this, then should we not be saying that you should be building in that coastal area that's potentially prone to flooding? And if you look at the Tongoia area where it floods down from up in the hills, that's a natural flood zone, but then there's a big housing development going up there. So, yeah, I suppose it concerns me when you have projects going forward and then the science says that this potentially this shouldn't happen, and then in the future, you're going to pay for protection for that building development for 300 homes.
Yeah, look, it's a key issue, and I think that's part of the reason for this work, because in the past there have been subdivisions granted by the district council and opposed by the regional council, for those very reasons you point to. So we're trying to be more coordinated in this project looking forward to try and not make it worse before we make it better, if that makes sense. So it is part of the plan to look at how's our planning regime and does it line up with what we know about these changing hazards. It's a work in progress, but it's part of this approach to make sure that we're not making it worse as we go along.
And I only say that because they built out there now that development, and I know Tongoia and that's some of our whānau have got land next door, and now they're saying they want to build. So they want to build on the coast now. They say, hey, if he can build next door, why can't we build? So it creates a problem.
Yeah, so Simon will probably move on to
Bloody good point.
the pathway
Like
concept.
you take that picture there, Haimoana 18. When is enough enough?
Yeah,
Tell-
they've
that-
already made the decision, mate.
Those properties, funnily enough, I think in the early 70s, the council said to them, you guys shouldn't be there, here's an offer to move out. I think only 2 of them took that up at the time. So this goes back decades, right, this problem, and it will keep going for decades more, hence the need for a long-term plan. Look, I'll keep rolling through. There's a couple more things to cover. I think just to note, I think coastal erosion is the most obvious thing we see that. After every storm event, there's one a couple of weeks ago, we can see the coast being affected. But our mapping shows that flooding from the sea is probably a bigger issue for more people. So that map there shows in the different colours. I hope it shows up okay there.
That tsunami that we...
No, that's just coastal flooding, so overtopping from a big storm event. So that red line is what you might see today in a big inundation event at Takiwā. The dark yellow is what you might see in about 50 years, and the light yellow is what you might see in about 100 years. So you may potentially get that entire community under some degree of seawater. So whilst erosion looks bad and looks more present, in the longer term it's the inundations, a big issue we face. In terms of how we've come up with our plan so far, we divided the coast in the strategic area up into 2 sort of major areas, a north and a south, north of port, south of port, and we formed 2 community-based panels with mana whenua, a lot of coastal community representatives, business, dock, lifelines, all came together over about a 14-month sort of window to come up with these long-term plans. It was an intense, sort of robust approach, and well considered to come up with our approach. I'm hitting the wrong buttons. And just a note here about how we've developed the approach. You may have seen this before. It's a reasonably commonly rolled out graph in the climate change sort of space. But what this shows along the bottom of the graph there is time, so from year 2000 to year 2200 at the end. And it shows potential sea level rise up the side there in metres. And these are all projections internationally for what the mean sea level may do in response to our different climate change scenarios. So the red line at the very top shows us continuing to emit globally high CO2 emissions, and then if we can do better, those lines start to come down. Those 2 circles indicate our sort of planning horizon. So we know that over the next 20 or so years, it's pretty much locked in that we're going to get about 0.3 of sea level rise, 0.3 of a metre. So we know that's coming no matter what we do globally. But if we look out 100 years to 2100, we could get a range of different outcomes. It could be north of a metre, or it could be under half a metre, depending on how well we do as a globe. So I guess it just shows, if you imagine what a metre of sea level rise could do, it would be a significant impact. Half a metre, perhaps much more manageable. So how do you plan for that uncertainty, which is a wide range of possible futures?
And is that half a metre, is it the high tide mark, or is it the low, how you get tidal? Would that be the low? I don't know, how do they?
Mean sea level, so everything moves up. So the high tide will move up.
Yeah.
Basically a change to the mean
Okay.
sea level.
Thank you. So to respond to that uncertainty, this is what this MFE guidance has asked us to do, is to come up with these long-term adaptive pathways. Here are 3 examples from our project so far for Homoana, Ahuriri and West Shore. So you can see that each one's got a short-term, a medium-term and a long-term step with a corresponding time frame. The idea is that you map out your long-term approach based on what you know now, but you remain flexible to bring those actions forward or back in time depending on how quick or slow climate change actually happens, or you may even change tact entirely if things change rapidly. So see at Homoana, we're thinking the plan for now is for the next 50 years we're going to try and hold that coastline pretty much where it is and keep that community safe. But beyond that, we're signalling that retreat is the way to go for that particular community. Now that plan may change. We'll keep monitoring over the next 20 years. We'll keep every 10 years we'll review this approach. We'll learn more. We'll know more. We might change that plan over time. But for now, that's what we're proposing as the approach for those communities. This map just shows, it's hard to see, but this is as the first step in each pathway for the entire coastline and a project area, just to show you what's proposed to occur physically on this coastline over the next perhaps 10 to 15 years. In broad terms, it's largely renourishment as a primary response, so bringing in more gravel to the beach to offset erosion losses. The main physical structures are proposed at Homoana and Takiwā, where groins are being proposed. And that's where you have you've seen them before, they stick out from the coast to catch the gravel as it rolls up the coastline. So you can see there is a significant package of works. I think the indications are it's about 15 million in capital expenditure and about 3 million annual operating costs. So there's a major proposal, but that's what's been come up with as a way to respond to these increasing hazards risks on this coastline. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a few. Yeah.
Renourishment, so that's pretty cunning term. Where are you going to get your gravel from? Is that because the tuki and that Clive no longer goes out? Are you going to that's where they would come from, so you're going to take it from them?
That's what we've modelled it on. So we've costed it based on, I think it's the middle and upper tuki.
Yeah, so we've
sources.
used an average haul length for those costs.
80 cents has just gone up. Gravel extraction.
Has anyone talked about the Treaty of Waitangi making any changes in all this?
I think
Will it?
all I would say is that there is obviously new legislation being developed right now by the government, particularly looking at this work. We're expecting a first, if not draft, at least some principles out sort of middle into this year. So a fresh look's been taken at this whole space at a central government level. So I'm sure that conversation will come in there. Locally, we've been working alongside mana whenua right from the first day, the co-governance and within the panels themselves. That's how we've responded to that initially, but I think this new legislation will be quite an interesting discussion for us in Hawke's Bay.
And I did see missing in your report is Te Matawa Maori, which is a quite customary kaitiaki group that goes from the Cape to Pānia. So we're looking at that coastline because it obviously affects customary, and that's appointed through all our marae and through Ngāti Niki.
Yeah.
So with them not engaged in the process, because obviously that affects the fishing resource and our kaitiaki divers, so maybe you'd need to have the conversation because obviously that's a major impact on those individuals that supply our marae. Because you talk about coastal strategy, but then we talk about customary use, and then those kaitiaki are appointed to do that mahi out in Moana,
Yeah,
but they're not on the list, which is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll certainly add that in. At this stage, it's just the marae we're proposing to talk to, but these guys can cover that in more detail.
Well,
Just one point on that, we
yeah.
are launching a new coastal ecology work stream. And we're very keen to work on, are there particular taonga species that should form part of that approach, work out sort of what's there now.
Yeah.
We have heard from mana whenua so far a particular concern about renourishment. If you're adding a lot of gravel to that beach, and in some places at West Shore, some sand offshore, what could that mean for reef systems particularly? So we're mindful of that, and that's why the Coastal Ecology Workstream is looking to figure out what's there now.
And I suppose just put it in perspective, kaitiaki, they've got a warrant from the Ministry of Fisheries and the Minister signs off on that, but when you look at kaitiaki for their role per se, that's about the marine environment because they do that whole environment. It's not just about getting kai moana, it's to look after the moana. So their marae, the iwi, they've all appointed them. So I just suppose it's because that's what we've been saying to our kaitiaki. Your role is not just about issuing fishing permits. Your role is a kaitiaki for the moana. So we're just saying to them to step up. So I'm saying we're asking them to step up, and we're saying as part of the process. And don't get me wrong, I'm a kaitiaki as well, and we're saying the same thing to ourselves around the management of the resource.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's good feedback.
Okay, and just mindful, we're trying to catch up on our timing, but upping the question.
All right, well, that was my last slide. So,
Kia ora, David, can I just quickly ask you a question? Over the years, what has been the main cause for the erosion along Home Moana out to Clifton?
look, well, it's not a simple answer, but there's a range of answers, and Chris can jump in as well. But in broad terms, it's an eroding coast because we're losing more gravel than we're replacing. So we gain a bit from Cape Kidnappers eroding, we gain a bit from the tuki, but we don't gain enough to offset what's being lost by the northward drift of gravel. So that's the simplest explanation. There's things like the earthquake overlay, there's other bits and pieces, but in broad terms, there's a net loss of gravel from that.
Now, just for general information, 10 years ago, I was told by one of my kaumātua at Matahiwi the reason for the erosion along Home Moana out to Clifton. He said it was the extraction of gravel from Awatoto. Okay, tons and tons of metal were taken out of the sea. And of course, he explained to us how the tide was pushing the gravel from the Cape right around towards Awatoto. And as we know, that plant was there for many, many years extracting gravel until it closed down. So that's the main reason why we have lost our protection with erosion along Homona and Te Wanga.
Can I just say, I just have a slightly different view. If you go and have a look at Cape Kidnappers would have been part of an ancient landscape going well out in the sea. And it's been eroded over millennia. And if you go around, the classic is you go around here where the airport is, and you have a look at the back of the airport, on the old lagoon, there's stacks, what they call things stacks. And what's the name? Some have got a name there, but one of them I've forgotten. But they used to be the water, so that's a sign that the sea has come in and eroded the land around it. The land was much higher, it all went out there. It's just, I would say this coast has been eroding for millions and millions of years. And we are going to have this process sped up because of sea rise and climate change. So there's no particular change here to me. It's just it's the way it's always been. And you have a look at Cape Kidnappers and see the dog's tooth out there. That was what all one time, you know, connected by land to being further out and further out. It's all been eroded away. Yeah, we're in an eroding zone here.
So we've spent a lot of work modelling that whole coast to fully understand how it's responding, and we do have a net sediment loss. Sediment does come from the cliffs, but it's very episodic. We get a major landslide and we get a lot of material and it may grow. We also get gravel coming out of the rivers during flood events, but again it's very episodic. And when you look at the averages, in an average year, that coast continues to erode, and as sea level increases will accelerate.
And if you look at the whakapapa of Ahuriri, where it got its name, when you look at Tu Ahuriri, and he used to clear the channel. So by the airport, that used to be the natural progression. So if you look in history, and you look back to him, and our Ahuriri got its name, they used to clear that channel, but that was due to build up a gravel. So you just always look back at history and see how that affects, because sometimes it's barometer of potential future. I don't know how that fits into your modelling, but I know there were some of the stories that when you were growing up, your teacher used to tell you about, the gravel used to block in Te Ahuriri, used to go out there and clear the channel out by the airport. So around that whakapapa and that history. So it's interesting how it intertwines and moving forward in what you're talking about. I just thought I'd add that because obviously there's a whakapapa around clearing the channel, and obviously Māori had an engineer at that time that used to do that to let the flow come through. So just based on your kōrero.
Just really mindful of our time, and there's another presentation as well. So no, thank you for that, and I hope everybody's well informed. There's a lot of questions.
Just to clarify that the main event is still coming, which is the engagement plan. Are you interested in hearing on the engagement plan? Simon's really done some background, so you have a full understanding of what the project's about. But
there is half an hour behind. So yep. Okay. Mana whenua engagement, I can't say no. Go.
Tēnei te mihi kia koe, ko Rebecca Ashcroft tōku ingoa. To speed this along, I'll just assume we've taken it as read. We want to make sure that mana whenua are informed and engaged ahead of going to public consultation next year, and we have in here a list of proposals of who we're going to talk to, and we just want your feedback on it. So thank you, Peter, for your feedback on.
And you've got one of the marae, because motio, and when you go about marae, I know what you may have looked at, it was coastal, but then, and aichi motio, but then our whakapapa comes to the coast, and then we've got, for our marae, we have just as much right as any marae sitting up the front, because we whakapapa through our tipuna. Just so you need to include that on
short
your...
version and motio. Please.
Okay, that's fine. Any other feedback?
That was my mistake.
Oh, yeah.
Whānau? Is anything else missing, whānau?
Move the report be accepted, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we're going to have someone to move the Māori engagement head of public consultation on implementation and execution of the coastal hazard strategy. Moved by Mike, seconded by Matahami, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you.
Kia ora, Chair. One comment, Uncle Hami. Hi. When our staff have been up here and presenting papers, I notice with growing prominence is that the use of te reo. E kia pepe hea mai, kia whakapapa mai. So I just wanted to acknowledge that through you, Uncle Hami.
We've noticed it as well, Petty. It's great to see.
I think I also acknowledge Petty as well. Well trained.
Thank you. And we'll go on to item 12, IRG flood control resilience funded projects.
Item 12, yeah. So look, this was really just an update on our IRG projects. So David Karakia, he heads up our project delivery team. Unfortunately, he's off sick today, so I'll present the key points. But you'll recall after COVID, government was looking at how it could support economic recovery. And as part of that, the river managers across New Zealand put up a $300 million bid through the Infrastructure Reference Group for a whole host of flood resilience type projects. And Hawke's Bay Regional Council was part of that. And our project package is around 30 million, and that is funded to the tune of around 20 million from the Crown. So it really has allowed us to accelerate our resilience program. And we've got 4 key projects in there that we're just reporting progress on. So in terms of the Helatonga Plains Flood Control Scheme, we have committed to delivering protection from floods of a 1 in 500 year event, and the existing stop bank network in large delivers that, but we need to look at the resilience of some of the sections. So the team have come up with a long list of, I think, around 39 particular sites where we need to look at the resilience, and we're working through a risk framework on those sites. And then over the next couple of seasons, we'll see that construction work completed. One of the catches with this Crown funding is we do need to spend it over the next 2 years. And these were all put up as essentially shovel-ready initiatives where there was no significant consenting activities required. We've also got the Upper Tuki gravel extraction flood control scheme. So there, because of its location, industry hasn't taken the volumes of gravel out of that scheme that we require to maintain that level of service in the long term. So that is a fantastic project that simply we wouldn't be able to afford without the Crown's support, but it has highlighted a whole lot of issues in the community about the scale and pace of that sort of work. So we are visiting that community regularly as we get going. And there's a key decision from Council to tip in the Regional Council's component of funding, which is essentially a loan that the Upper Tuki ratepayers have had to take out. And that will be fully approved when the LTP in full is approved later in June. So that means we can commence, and essentially the preparatory work only has been done so far. The third project is on the Upper Tuki flood control scheme at State Highway 50 bridge on the Waipawa. So that's another $1 million job that we would have not been able to afford without the Crown support. It's been an area that we've been watching for the last 10 or 15 years and trying through a lot of softer engineering methods to stabilise, but unsuccessfully.
So just on that point 19, you see you're going to fund to extract gravel.
Yep.
Is that correct? And then we're saying, we talked about gravel extraction earlier, that you need more gravel.
Yep. I
just think, well, if people want gravel, then you're having to pay to get gravel out. Where's the baseline around that?
This once again comes back to the intent of this new consent, where the Regional Council would hold the consent. We'd have much more control of where we can direct people to go. At the moment, if they ask for a consent and the gravel's there, it's pretty hard to withhold that consent. And so what this particular piece of work is doing is essentially funding the transport differential between the Upper Tuki scheme and the traditional sources for that gravel.
Yeah, it just doesn't, you know, when I look at it, it doesn't make sense because you're paying for something that people want. So, in that, shouldn't cost them anything. You should be just charging, making 80 cents and then giving it out to the community for their community project.
Yep, so look, we've tried very hard over the years. We've discounted our component down to 20 cents per cubic metre, and it's just miles in the truck. That's cost, and where gravel can be located closer to the jobs, that's exactly what's done. It's very hard money sort of scenario. But that's the Crown's contribution, which is fantastic. It means we can really make a big dent and get that scheme back to where it should be. You know, if we didn't have this Crown funding, we'd essentially be having to rate the ratepayer the full amount of that activity over a longer period of time. So it is beneficial. So the Upper Tukituki erosion control there, again, we've just about finished that job. There's been some great opportunities for Kaitiaki Rangers in terms of planting. And all of these projects have social procurement outcomes, and we have to report back to the Crown the number of jobs generated for Pacifica, Maori, women, COVID, people who've lost jobs due to COVID. There's a whole raft of reporting that goes back. And the final project up in Wairoa now is in a consultation phase. The design has been done, and there's a slight delay in getting the sheet pile out of China on that one, but again, that's on track. So I guess I've just brief summary of those projects. Happy to answer any questions. I think it's a great opportunity working with the Crown on these projects that have really allowed us to accelerate our resilience program.
And you touched on employment, but I know James at the next meeting is going to give us an overview on that and how that's benefiting, because it's part of the government initiative, so we need to be able to see investment in our in the rangatahi and whānau. So
we can feed all that data in. Yep.
Yeah, we had at our Mātangi Overseas Board, Harry zoomed in and sort of we had a discussion about the Wairu mahi. So yeah, other than we got to hear it before the actual councillors, so that needs a bit of a catch up there. But also that cultural impact assessment be done, because Kaitiaki and Mahinga Kai things there. And like the idea to start planting, just some feedback from us. And with that, if there isn't any questions, Charlie, sorry Charlie.
Yeah, let's go take you back about an hour.
Yeah.
Can you just explain that? So Pyro flood scheme didn't make the cut. So is that, and we're talking about 1 in 500 floods, are we not expecting one up there?
So I guess what I can explain is the types of services that we provide. So we have flood control schemes, and we have two main flood control schemes, being the Upper Tukituki, which provides a 1 in 100 level of protection, and the Heretatonga Plains flood control, which is a 1 in 500. All of our other 23 schemes are drainage schemes, so they provide drainage to agricultural land and also urban environments, and they have a very low level, about a 1 in 10. So Pyro would be in that 1 in 10, so it's not, it's providing drainage for the community, it's not providing a 1 in 100 plus flood protection.
Who gets rated for the Pyro one?
So we would essentially have determined who benefits from that scheme, and so there would have been some calculations undertaken, the extent of the scheme, who was benefiting. Then there's a ratio between the direct beneficiaries and the general rate, and it ranges between 70-30 for Heretatonga, because there's a large community benefit, because the bridges and a lot of the main roads and railways and things are protected. A lot of the smaller schemes, it's like a 90-10, because it's a local road or only a small amount of benefit.
If you ask all the people in Pyro, they'll say the benefits are the people that live in Wairua, not the Pyro people. Because it's the drain, as you say, and it goes straight past them. When that Wairua River floods, it actually cuts across from the showgrounds and it cuts across there. So the Pyro people aren't actually involved, and I think one of their concerns is that they're paying for something that everyone else should be paying for, because my tipuna have lived at Whakirangi Marae for a few hundred years, They've never been flooded out.
Yeah, so we're setting up that meeting with that community.
Yeah, I better include Michelle and
Yeah,
Catalina.
I live there.
Yeah.
So when we hit Cyclone Bola,
Yeah.
the river goes to the quickest way to the sea.
Yeah.
So cut across the AMP showgrounds, flooded my grandmother's, my house, Waiherere,
Yeah.
all those places there. And what made it worse was the old rodeo. The old rodeo had put a sort of a bit of a mound there and people sit on it.
Yeah.
Well, between that and the railway line, it created the soup bowl.
Yeah.
So that's what.
Yeah, they could do with a dike all the way around there. So the river just carries on around and follows its course.
So we've got that meeting being set up, so we can discuss that in detail with the residents and work through
Just
that.
one quick question, because Toro would want me to ask that question around paku rātahi, because Hiniuru, Pahuwera, Tongoia, they're all invested in there, they're building orchards, putting on it, and they've been hit with flooding, and I know it's been all through Facebook, and I think Rex might have done a visit out there the other day, so they're creating economic development, they've replanted that whole in that valley. So I know it's a major concern for those iwi organisations that are.
So we've had a number of discussions with Toro, and just for everyone's understanding, the regional council manages 18 river mouths across the bay, and the level of service that we provide is safety of life, and that's quite different from agricultural flooding, and all of our schemes are set up essentially that way, and also in terms of flooding of inhabitable dwellings. So that's how we put our set points together for when we would respond around safety of people and the safety of inhabitable dwellings. And that function is not funded by the ratepayers on the particular river or anything like that. It's funded out of the general ratepayer. And so we have a consistent level of service on all of our river mouths to provide that level of service. So that's the conversations we've been having with the community. When we look at our documentation, which outlines the level of service, it has in there explicitly that the flooding of agricultural land from time to time will occur under this level of service. So the Regional Council has never stated and never said we will be preventing those farms from flooding, and that's what we're having to work through with that particular community.
Hey, well, with that said, could this also fall underneath the Tangoio to Clifton coastal hazard project?
So I guess we're looking at the erosion and inundation, and when we look at the proximity of the height of the land and where the ocean is, I think some of the scenarios out at 2050 will have some of that property being flooded essentially by the ocean. So it is very close. The other thing, we have been speaking with Mangahanguru Tangata, which have a statutory acknowledgement of that river, and their view is quite different from the community who are actively farming that area. So we're having to balance all of those views, and I guess we're just working through that issue.
How different is their view? They want to stop flooding too, or they do not want to stop flooding?
And we've got to have more discussion, but to summarise their view, it's probably minimising the impact of man on that awa. But they're probably wanting to see a reduction of machinery and a reduction in the frequency of opening. So different people have different views.
Oh, I can't comment. There I even child.
And so we just got to work through with everyone involved, so we get a satisfactory solution. That's where we're at.
Yeah, because obviously we would have to have a concern for Māori development, and we're not supporting our Māori investment in an economic return. Yeah. And so that's where, I suppose, how do you get a balance to support our Māori community that's trying to build economic capacity for a Māori community.
Without being to the detriment of the environment, right?
Yeah, I'm not commenting on that.
Yeah, you're juggling act. So with that, can we get someone to move that we receive the update on IRG flood control resilience funded projects, please? Moved by Charlie, seconded by Katarina. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, your hand up. Against? Carried.
Catching up?
We're getting there.
Good.
Getting there. What are we up to now? Statutory advocacy update, page 77. Page 77.
So
What page you on?
77.
Go.
Jesus.
No, you've got to grab them.
Are we leaving this? No? Just wanna
Chair, if we
move-
just take the paper as read,
Read.
and if there's
Yeah,
any
yeah.
questions.
Any questions? Tātai? Kāori?
Move.
Okay, so somebody to move, Rick will move that we, receive the June 2021 statutory advocacy report. Seconder, please.
Yep.
Matohami, sorry, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Well, we're going to speed along now. Reports from Regional Council Committee meetings. Item 15. Any questions?
Chair, again, if we
Kia
could
ora,
just take
Katarina.
Read.
the content has been read, and if there's any questions arising.
Although, Chair, I did think you wanted to deal with the road safety item raised by Api earlier on.
Oh, yes,
under the
yes,
Transport
yes,
Committee.
thank you. Sorry, Api, this, you're on with your second report.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, is that
You
okay?
can tell us all the good news.
I suppose with this report, I'm just asking for support from this committee, the council and standing committee. And this is a report I'll give to our transport committee also. And so it concerns the road speed restrictions that have been about for the last couple of months. And okay, so you know, for me to fully understand Whakakutahi's stance to apply speed restrictions on several of our Hawke's Bay roads and open highways, what was concerning was the implication for Māori. More and more traffic issued tickets for speeding, not speed camera issued, unwittingly turning these people into criminals because they are unable to pay their fines. On the other hand, speed does kill, and many whānau have lost beloved ones. It is therefore imperative that iwi supports the recommended speed restrictions. However, it is now timely important for Whakakutahi New Zealand Transport Agency to support an education program to have trained Māori providers engaging with young to middle-aged Māori drivers to help enhance their road code knowledge and driving skills. If these drivers infringe, then police should refer them to their local Māori providers to deal with first rather than finding them on the spot. These young drivers can be carefully monitored, involving driving instructors and or having to attend defensive driving classes that will definitely improve their driving skills. An opportunity to take a car to a speed track perhaps, a good outcome could see these people being given just a warning. Of course, the lower percentage who fail will need to improve. Māori providers need to work harder, providing a marae-friendly environment, learning tikanga, protocol, wairuatanga, spirituality, akomanga hauora ki te tinana me te wairua, health education relating to physical and mental health, manakitanga, hospitality, whakapapa, genealogy, family tree, and whanaungatanga, relationships, embracing Māori reoffenders, offering them a second chance to become better members of society. The for Māori by Māori approach is now becoming the norm, which puts the onus on Māori who absolutely know what is best for Māori. So, like I said, I like the support of our committee and especially the council for this to go a bit further, go on to our transport committee and hopefully get some reaction from Whakakutahi. So, kia ora.
And just to add to that, because we did have a discussion prior to about in supporting Api's kōrero, and then we've got a history of whakapapa in relation to this conversation, and then I think we made recommendations to the Transport Committee a number of years ago about driver licensing, and I can speak because I sponsor some rangatahi to do their driver's licence, and we've got to pay because we can get them through the first stage, which is the learners, but then it's the driving on the road, and with Pahuere, I managed a project years ago with Pahuere because they had an issue in Ripoata Mohaka with police pulling up our rangatahi, so we've done a training initiative for 20 rangatahi, put them through their driver's licence and that. But I suppose when we're talking about road safety and a collective response with the different organisations, then how do we get those kids that are coming out of school good skills and how to drive properly. And I know we once always sponsor some young people to do some driving lessons, and that's good because they get the restricted, but then they're taught good skills. So as a transport committee and the regional council, I thought it made a commitment to look at doing some work in relation to helping rangatahi or people in general get through at a young age into restricted licences, and it just makes sense. Like we can do the learners, that's pretty easy. It costs about $100 and something bucks. That's good, but getting those 10 lessons, it's $1,000 per participant. So it'd be good if we can, if we were able to get some people, and maybe with the police, we've spoken to the police about it as well, because of road safety. If there was one conduit that we're able to bring all those different organisations together to impact on driver's licence for, especially for rangatahi, even some older people that don't have licences. You used to be able to just stick on, someone said this morning, you could stick on your restricted for years and years, but now I think the legislation has changed, so that's all part of transport and safety, and the huge costs in the road toll when you have accidents. So just to add to Hawke's.
So Chair, we are funding driver licensing and driver training, but there's a question about whether it's adequately targeted and it's to the volume needed, and that's done in coordination with New Zealand Police and the other councils in a coordinated exercise. Katrina's just about to initiate a review of the Regional Road Safety Program, which is an efficiency and effectiveness review required under the Local Government Act. Can I suggest, if it's not already built in as part of the scope of that, that we look at the extent to which Māori communities are being adequately considered in our regional road safety work, and what opportunities exist working with Marae, for example, to deliver road safety programs by Māori for Māori, because I think clearly this is an area where we're not doing as well as we could, and I think this review presents an opportunity for us to do that. That review will be reported back to the Transport Committee and then can ultimately come here too for your visibility. So.
Just through the chair, just to add to James, so the 3 E's that sit in behind Waka Kotahi is enforcement, engagement and education. So it certainly sort of fits within that realm. There are existing programs that run with New Zealand Police, so I think there is a bit of a trilogy approach to this. So I just wanted to commend the paper coming forward and its kōrero, much as I would loathe to drive all the way to Taupo at 80 kilometres an hour.
I just want to pick up on Pierre's point about that. With this thing here, I get the impression it's reminiscent or taken out of the songbook of that great saying, the beatings will continue until morale improves. I have never understood why people think that if you beat up on people time and time again, you're going to get an improvement in behaviour. I just don't get this. The second thing is, I feel that this finger pointing at blaming people who cause these accidents is only alienating the community. If we're going to change our driving, we have to change the relationship we have between the agencies and the community. It is very much a hostile them and us. And if you read up his paper, that's a reflection of that. This is them and us. Well, as long as we have that, we're not going to get a change in behaviour and change in attitudes. It's going to continue. So I think personally, I feel we have to have a rethink of how we do this. I've watched all these reforms come through. I've watched where we went from 80 to 50 for alcohol, supposed to save 30 lives a year. Well, you go and show me where they've saved the 30 lives. Then went a whole pile of other programs and said we're going to save 100 lives. Show me where they've saved 100 lives. We could put all these strips down the middle and wires and so on. Well, show me how many lives we've saved that. The road toll hasn't shifted, actually. It's gone up.
Increased.
And we've then changed our driver licensing regime, so that kids in the rural areas can't get their licence unless they travel from Wairoa to Napier. Well, show me how that's improved things. What we've now got, there's more kids driving around with half a licence or no licence than we've had before. How has that improved things? I don't see that this has improved things. Personally, I think we need to have a thorough rethink about how we go about this. But then again, there's all those ones who like to give beatings, so the beatings will continue, and are hoping for morale to improve. Well, I reckon it will never do that.
Not allowed to spank.
Don't you worry about that. I do with tickets, man. Beat you with paper.
Anything else to add on that? And Charlie?
So we've got an action point from that, to follow up. Yep. Yep.
Oh, okay. And I'd just like to add, so everybody knows, I did mention it earlier, Regional Council pay for the driver's licensing program in Wairoa College, and they go from 16, they try and get them right through to their restricted and on their way to their full. So I've seen it in action, and kids come out the other end with a full licence. It's the ones that weren't in that program that might have got their learners and haven't moved on from there, or it's too hard for them to get to Gisborne. They usually go to Gisborne, and then you've got to have a legal car. Mum or dad's got to take a day off work to take them. You know, there's all these impacts, and 64% Māori. So yeah, but that's some way. But there's opportunities for us to create those programs like the REAP officers who were doing that, and they were covering all the licences.
And you're 3 months, you try and book someone in to get a licence, you got to wait 3 months to get a licence. So the infrastructure is not there, and then, I know I tried to get my boy licence, and I rang Taupo, Daddy, right around, and I just couldn't get them in. So you got all these kids sitting around, and highly likely they're going to get out there and drive while they're waiting. So I'm just saying it's like you say, it's broken down. You need to fix it.
You can tell when they haven't got their licence because they don't know the road code when you meet them on an intersection. So kia ora, if we could get someone to move.
People have got the licence to do exactly the same bamboozle. Not just kids who haven't got the licence, let me tell you that.
Human error. So if we get someone to receive the report from Regional Council and committee meeting. Matua Paura, seconder please. Rosie, seconder. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Okay, because I can see my mates over here looking at it watching.
Down the wire.
16, okay, we'll go for organisational performance report taken as read. Any questions pertaining to your...
Also moved.
Seeing Paura's resolution.
Paura's
Various
moved,
chief man to my right here.
Rick, and all in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Oh, last one's minor items, item number 17, and we had strategy, Māori strategy?
Kia ora.
Oh, that was Teddy.
It probably isn't a minor item, but it seemed the best place to put it, at least to make the alert.
Yeah.
And in the previous Māori committee, and it was a hui that was held down at Puke Mukimuki. And down there we indicated, the other kōrero that is an abutment to this is in relation to the Māori committee and its scope that it has, which is much wider than the Regional Planning Committee. And I know that earlier on today in your pre-meeting, there was a bit of a discussion about the future of the Māori committee, and particularly as we move through the Māori constituencies. It sits as a Schedule 7, and like other committees of council, is susceptible to Regional Council's prerogative when it resets itself at the triennial election. So what I wanted to bring back on the table, which was the previous discussion at Puke Mukimuki, and I've discussed this with our Chief Executive, with James, is that what we don't have underneath our long-term planning and our 5-year strategic plan for council is we don't have an umbrella strategy within which kaupapa Māori, take Māori are captured, including Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And wouldn't it be wonderful to actually have an umbrella strategy of that sort that worked in alignment in terms of the strategic plan and our long-term planning, but perhaps had a slightly further forecast ahead of it, was to set what our activities might look like and who would be the most appropriate fora to actually sponsor, to be the matua, to be the parent for that in this committee, which gives it a real purpose in terms of moving forward. It embeds it in terms of what Regional Council is about. It provides a direction and a plan in alignment with our LTP and with our 5-year strategy. Minor items don't get to be discussed. And so I thought I would bring it up as a minor item, and all you have to do is just signal with a bit of a nod, and what we'll do is we'll bring a paper forward in the very near future that puts some guidance and parameters and direction around this for your consideration.
Got it.
And it's part of our charter anyway, eh? So it adheres to what we adhere to.
Comment on it.
I'm just saying. It's written in our charter, so it's good that it's.
Tautoko.
Tautoko.
And the last one is white bait stands. So just noticed and Nathan's like, oh no, but we have to speak about it, Nathan, because it's Wairoa, and you're talking about the white bait stands. So we've never paid $50, and we're not going to. And I need to warn you. Like last white bait season, there was a fight over some white bait stands, and shots were fired.
Oh my
Police had to move in. That's how serious our people are about their white bait stands. I just need to, you know, you can ask the police. It happened. It happened down my road, down Ruataniwha. So, but the other thing is, my understandings with Māori land, especially like tūpuna land that we were handed down from the waka, where our land goes in, it goes into the river. So we own where their stand is. And you know, I just need to know what that's all about. And with us, usually it's traditional, like, you know, my family's this area and other families that area, and, you know, people go down below our marae, and we know. And if they're not there, well, you jump on. Don't get caught though. But yeah, you jump on but and share. But it's about I just got to say that, like, the white bait is really important, not just to Tangata Whenua, it's important to our whole community. And there's people that have been fishing there generations, they're a part of our community. And I don't think it's going to be popular, Nathan. And we just have to put that out there. Kia ora.
People come in and white bait.
So what's going to happen coming up to the white baiting season in August, and then the $56 you pay to get a permit to fish the Clive with a 2-ton kitty? I don't know. That's regional council compliance thing.
So, Chris was just going to respond?
Yeah, we,
Michelle.
in terms of the white bait activity that the regional council oversees, that's purely within our managed schemes, and it's because we own the land in the schemes. There's a basically a permit to have the structure there. So we currently don't actively do anything up in Wairoa in terms of managing structures.
Yeah, never have. So that's
Never
right.
have.
Yeah, no,
And
it just came up
Not
in the report.
surprised. Who was
Oh,
thinking of a
hallelujah.
Okay, Karel.
Matua, matua.
Yeah, just before ke mutu hoki tātou, he take iti nei hoki tāku. Just a small mention in the minor agenda. I just wanted to ask our Maori committee if they would be willing to acknowledge Zach Mafuare.
Kia ora.
Whiwhi tohu ki a Zach. Mai ngā tohu o Whenua hapati pēr. So toko hoki tōna mai to acknowledge all the work that he's been doing over the years. And we heard Paula, and I know where the property is that he's putting into Papakainga to Hawke. Huge. Huge. But the other thing that he does is what they call yeah, Taiwhenua Trust.
Taiwhenua Trust, yeah.
And he's been doing that for years with all our young people from about 5 up to about 17 now. They go all over the country. And he brings them out of that sort of, you know, where there's a bit of hardship. And he's been doing that for years, and all of those kids have gone on to become better people, you know, over the years. But I'm just only asking our Māori committee if you can forward a tono to PPK to have him nominated as a recipient, maybe for Queen's Honour in the new year, to 2022.
Chair, and perhaps I'm just mindful that we're still on public viewing, and all of the awards, the Queen's Awards, are supposed to be done in confidence.
Oh, okay.
Disregard.
But that said, perhaps if you are of a mind, if you could send those through to would that be all right, Uncle?
Okay.
Send them through to me, or send them to you?
No, I'll send it to you fellas. It'd be better for you fellas to do it to our committee, and I'll do the review one.
You send it to me, and I'll collate and consult with our chairs.
Kia ora.
Enough said on that in confidence.
That I'll hand it over to you.
Kia ora, Uncle Hami.
Well spotted.
Would you grant me the opportunity to do our closing karakia?
Yeah,
Kia ora, Uncle. Just as a preamble to that, yesterday we were at Robert's Tangi over at Waimarama, and we were approached by Piripi Smith. So many of you know Piripi as one of our kaitiaki and founders of Aotearoa. On the 20th of January, that's a Sunday, at 6 a.m. in the morning, you need to be down at Aotearoa. You probably need to be there about 10 to 6 in the morning.
June.
June.
Yeah, it's just a long way away.
At 10
January.
to 6 a.m. Oh, yeah, on
not
the
January.
20th of June. Sorry, 20th of June.
It's Christmas.
Shortest day,
No, the 20th of June.
shortest day of the year.
And there'll be some celebrations down there, and I understand Rex will be speaking as well. He's indicated he'll be speaking. But I just wanted to put that into your calendars. Please be there to support that. And certainly one of our local, it's becoming an icon down there, Aotearoa, let alone the corridor that surrounds that. So I just, on that theme, I just wanted to finish with this karakia, Uncle. Nā tito o waru e nei karakia nei. And I'll say it in Māori and then I'll say it in English and then we'll share it with you. Tiro hea matariki kua noho ki ngā pari o tautoru. Kua mōhio tātou ko ia te kai rūri o te tau. Tahi kia pīpiri, rua kia hongongoe, toru kia hiri turi kōka, whawharua atai, I mua o hiringa anuku, I mua o hiringa arangi. Ki tua o hiringa kerekere. Ka kerekere te wai, ka kerekere te patu, ka kerekere te tangata. Ka noho are hua ka heke I hua uruao, ka tōtō te kai, ka tōtō te tangata. E kuaha whānui whakapuare tia ki te puna kai rāua ko te puna tangata. Ka ora te tehi mea, ka ora te tehi mea. And it was Titoko Waru, who was an ancestral chief of Taranaki, and he spoke of the synergy of the heavens, the earth, and all in between, the need to plan and act with respect to the seasons for survival, for growth, and for prosperity. Translated, it says, "Behold the Pleiades, which sits upon the banks of Orion's belt, confirming for us its influential powers over the seasons, the beginning of winter in June, moving to July, then to August with its knee-hugging cold and sweeping depression. If that is all we adhere to, even in the approaching season of warmth and growth of September, then October, November and December, drought, famine, death of people and civilization will surely prevail. However, Rehua, the planter of food, awaits Uruwao, the life-giving dew of the night that nourishes the earth from which all things grow. Life, food, people, giving birth to widespread renewal of existence under the influence of the seasons. If we choose peace, there is every chance of renewal of growth. In all things, there is life. Turu whakamaua kia tīna.
Tīna.
He hui e.
Ai
Kia ora tata.
Kia ora.
Great military strategist, that guy too.
They're going to find out how to do
On
this.
the cusp of changing New Zealand system.
Rather unknown, unlike Te Raupara.
I know, on the cusp. I've been to the,
You had to run out.
Yeah, you kept them going,
Right.
so
Like you.
that's good.
maybe it's a piece of New Zealand history.